In the intricate tapestry of family dynamics, the threads of love, betrayal, and redemption often intertwine in unexpected ways. This story follows Mason and his family as they navigate the tumultuous waters of infidelity, emotional turmoil, and the quest for healing. When Mason faces a health scare that forces him and his loved ones to confront deep-seated issues, the fragile facade of their relationships begins to unravel. As secrets come to light, each character must grapple with their choices, leading to revelations that challenge the very foundation of their bonds. Through tears, confrontation, and unexpected alliances, the journey of these characters unfolds, highlighting the profound impact of honesty and trust in the fragile realm of human connection. This tale is a poignant exploration of how love can endure amidst heartbreak and how, sometimes, the path to healing requires difficult decisions and the courage to let go. There are individuals in our society who genuinely believe that adultery is a normal part of life, viewing it as a natural process without any moral implications. The most tragic part of this mindset is how it ensnares innocent people, ultimately leading to the destruction of their once happy marriages and leaving them to deal with the devastating aftermath. Mason Lewis and his son-in-law, Jonathan Wyatt, were currently on a business trip for the power generator company Mason's father had founded, which is now under Mason's management. They were in Virginia, working on installing a new generator at a client's site, and their schedule had them leaving Newark on Monday morning, planning to return Friday afternoon. Jonathan had met Mason's daughter, Jessie, while studying mechanical engineering at Rutgers. They tied the knot 4 years ago and welcomed a son named Mason III, affectionately nicknamed May. Jonathan had stepped into the role of the son Mason never had, and Mason treated him as such. Jonathan was a devoted husband and father, always treating Mason and his wife, Mary, with the love and respect of true family. Having lost his parents in a tragic car accident when he was just a toddler, Jonathan was raised by his older aunt until he graduated college. "Hey Dad," Jonathan said midweek as they finished setting up the generator. "Everything's ready for the startup. How about catching an early flight back tonight? I can stick around for an extra day to wrap up the training." Mason, still recovering from a recent knee replacement that hadn't fully healed, replied, "No, I'll handle the training. You head back early." With a chuckle, Jonathan countered, "Remember, you promised I could take over training duties from now on. Plus, it's your 45th anniversary on Saturday. Mom will be thrilled to have you back early. There's a direct flight leaving in 2 hours, and I've arranged your transportation. Your bags are already in the car. I'll just catch a ride to the airport tomorrow afternoon." A couple of hours later, Mason arrived in Newark and was making his way to the baggage claim area when he spotted his daughter ascending the escalator. He assumed Jonathan had called her for a ride. Moving toward her, he noticed her stepping off the escalator and embracing another man. His heart froze as he witnessed his married daughter kissing a stranger, the man's arms wrapping around her possessively as if it were a routine occurrence. He lingered behind other travelers, unable to tear his gaze away, pretending to be preoccupied with their conversation. "Stop it, Jessie," she said to the man, Alex, pulling his hands away from her waist. "Haven't you had your fill over the past 2 nights?" "No, I can never get enough of you, Jess. When can we see each other again? When will your clueless husband be out of town once more?" She chuckled lightly. "I think the next trip is to Harrisburg, but that's too close to home. I'll text you when they fly out to a place farther away. I know they're planning a trip to Canada at the end of next month that'll last through the weekend, so maybe we can do an overnight. Mom or Ellen will watch the kid, and I'll tell John the first have a seminar to attend." "Just one more kiss to remember those sweet lips by," he said, leaning in for another embrace. Mason felt his face flush with anger but fought to keep his composure. He waited until the man was out of sight before striding toward Jessie. "What the hell, Jessie?" She jumped at the sound of her father's furious voice, her face draining of color as she quickly turned to see if Jonathan was with him. "Daddy! What are you doing here? Where's John?" she asked, her voice shaking as she searched behind him. Who the hell is he, Jesse? How long have you been cheating on your husband? The words were out before he could stop himself, his tone echoing loudly and drawing the attention of nearby onlookers. Oh God, Daddy! How long have you been standing there? What did you hear? She tried to approach and embrace him, but he kept her at arm's length, needing to express his disgust. What a disgrace my own daughter has become. I'm ashamed to even look at you. How could you betray Jonathan like this? With that, he turned and descended the opposite escalator, leaving her standing there in shock. Daddy, please. She called after him. 20 minutes later, he was driving down the turnpike toward Edison, tears streaming down his face. Mason anticipated his wife would retire early, as was her habit, so he quietly entered the kitchen through the two-car garage. Mary, I expected you'd be asleep, he said, finding her sitting at the kitchen table in her red pajamas, a cigarette in her hand, despite her earlier claims of quitting months ago. What's with the smoke? Have a seat, she said, a calmness in her voice that only heightened his agitation. Mason, sorry I didn't call. We wrapped up early, and Jonathan stayed for training, but there's something we need to discuss. Jesse called me, she said, taking a deep drag from her cigarette and exhaling toward the kitchen light above. I'm aware of what you witnessed and heard at the airport, he replied, his anger bubbling to the surface. You can't tell Jonathan, Mary retorted, her demeanor unfazed. Are you kidding me? Our daughter is cheating on her husband, who's like a son to us. She didn't seem surprised. How long, Mary? He pressed. She just needs to get it out of her system. He provides her with excitement that Jonathan fails to deliver. This is all so wrong. I'm going to tell Jonathan as soon as he gets home. I can't believe you are okay with this. You can't tell him. What good will it do? They'll get divorced, he'll move out, and our grandson will have no dad. You'll lose a daughter, whom I know you love, plus you'll lose Jonathan because we can't keep seeing him after what our daughter did. I love Jonathan too, Mason said, his voice rising. Honey, think about how unhappy he'll be. My daughter shouldn't be sleeping with another man. I didn't raise her that way. His face turned bright red as he leaned against the wall behind him, frustration boiling over. Stop it. You need to calm down. People cheat every day. She thinks this will be over soon. She's not going to leave Jonathan for Alex because she doesn't love him, and he has a family back in Boston. She's ending it now, it was just a physical thing. Mason's eyes widened as he gazed at his wife, disbelief flooding through him. Wow, you know the jerk's name. How long have you been aware? Did she pick up this promiscuity from you? Mary let out a deep sigh, her expression turning serious. This isn't just about us, Mason. It's about Jesse finding her way, even if it's through a terrible mistake. Mason stared at her, searching for any hint of understanding, but the gulf between their perspectives felt insurmountable. His heart ached for the family he had hoped to protect, and the bitter reality of betrayal hung heavy in the air. As he grappled with the enormity of the situation, he felt his world unraveling before him. He sighed heavily and leaned back in his chair, desperately avoiding the question. Yet, the silence hung in the air, delivering a clear message: he was a disgrace. The urge to flip the table in anger surged within him, but instead, he forced himself to rise and take the stairs two at a time, grabbing his small suitcase on the way out. Downstairs, Jessie sat sobbing uncontrollably. Her world had crumbled in an instant, as her secret romance with Alex had abruptly ended. The realization hit her hard: her father, the ever-watchful figure in her life, might inform her beloved John about the whole mess. Alex had been a comforting presence, stepping in whenever John was out of town, and now that stability felt shattered. With her heart racing, she grabbed her phone and called her mother. Mom. Oh my God, Dad knows about Alex. Wait, what? How could he know? Her mother responded, her voice a mixture of confusion and concern. He saw us at the airport. He was dropping me off when I kissed Alex goodbye, and I think he overheard us talking about a trip to Canada we planned. Panic seeped into Jesse's voice. I can't lose John. What am I going to do? Take a moment to breathe and calm down. Maybe go to your sister's house where Mason is. It'll give me some time to talk to your dad, her mother suggested, her tone soothing. Jesse choked back tears. I can't believe I let you talk me into cheating. Sure, Alex seemed perfect, but he's not worth risking my marriage over. We can just say it was a brief fling. Your dad will believe whatever I tell him. Look at me, I've had my fair share of lovers since our 30th anniversary, and he's never suspected a thing, her mother replied, trying to reassure her. But Mom, he's not like Dad. He made it clear, one strike and I'm out if I ever cheat on him. Plus, Dad overheard Alex bragging about our nights together, Jesse sobbed. He called me names and yelled at me. My own father. Take it easy, her mother advised gently. John might be upset, but trust me, you two can work through this. Men are simple creatures, they think about intimacy all the time. He'll come around. Jessie felt the weight of despair pressing down on her. What if Mason finds out? She pleaded, fear evident in her voice. Can you drive, or should we call an Uber? You've been crying so much, you can barely focus, her mother said. I can't. I should leave my car and pick it up tomorrow, Jessie mumbled, wiping her tears. Mason sank onto the bed, his head pounding with anxiety. Should he confide in John? The thought made him dizzy, and he nearly blacked out from the pressure. Meanwhile, Mary stood at the bedroom door, worried about the silence between Mason and John. Suddenly, a crash shattered the stillness. Rushing to the door, Mary found Mason sprawled on the floor, lifeless. Oh God, Mason, she gasped, hurrying to his side and checking for a pulse. Her heart raced as she looked into his vacant eyes. Across town, John was finishing up his workday. He decided to grab a quick salad at Annabelle's before heading back to his hotel. As he ate, he caught a glimpse of Sports Center on the TV. He had expected a call from Mason when he arrived in Newark, but to his disappointment, there were no missed calls on his phone. After a refreshing shower, John pulled on a comfortable t-shirt and shorts. He attempted to reach Jessie, but the call went straight to voicemail. Hey honey, just wanted to check in. I guess Dad made it back home. He was supposed to call me about the job, but I'm guessing you all went out for dinner. He left early to help set up for the anniversary party. I'll be back tomorrow afternoon, so get ready for some quality time together. I miss you and Mom like crazy. I love you more than anything, like cotton candy. After hanging up, John tried to call Mason, but once again he was met with silence. Hey Dad, just wanted to check in. Training went smoothly today. I'll hang around tomorrow to oversee the generator startup before heading home. Good night, Dad. Meanwhile, Jessie's sister Ellen was trying to calm her down over the phone. Take a deep breath, Jess. Tell me what happened. Dad saw me with Alex, Jessie cried. He called me a loose woman. He's going to tell John that I messed up. Wait, Alex? Who is he? I thought you broke up with him after that night you said you were drunk. That was 6 months ago, Jess, Ellen exclaimed, her disbelief palpable. I don't know. I mean, John is amazing and everything I've ever wanted, but he travels so much. I asked Mom how she deals with it, and she laughed and said there are other ways to handle things. She told me she's been seeing other people. Ellen's shock turned into concern. So you've both been cheating on your husbands? Jess, this isn't just a mess. You could lose everything. I fear I've lost my father and soon my husband too. I can't bear to lose you as well, Jessie sobbed. Well, this certainly throws a wrench into our plans for the anniversary party next week, Ellen said, trying to lighten the mood, but her phone buzzed, interrupting her. It's Mom. I don't want to talk to her, Jessie exclaimed, but before she could hang up, Mary chimed in. Ellen, your dad lost consciousness, and paramedics are attending to him now. Jessie's heart raced as she grabbed the phone. Is Daddy still breathing? She asked frantically. Oh no, is this my fault? Please don't let him die. I think he's still breathing but unconscious. The paramedic is coming over now. Hold on, Mary said before abruptly hanging up. Ellen overheard the conversation from the other end. Jess, what did you do? What happened? It's Dad. He's unconscious, Jessie cried, her voice breaking. Remember that minor stroke he had last year? Ellen asked, her voice trembling. I need to go over there now. You stay with Maze. Tears streamed down Jessie's cheeks. Please call me as soon as you know anything, she pleaded. As she hung up, a notification for a voicemail from John caught her attention. She listened, and the tears flowed again as he professed his love for her, comparing it to cotton candy, the same sweet moment they had shared at the boardwalk all those years ago. Regret washed over her as she realized she had jeopardized her marriage and perhaps her father's life. She felt utterly trapped, unable to face the consequences of her actions. Please hold on, darling, Mary begged, her voice filled with concern as Jessie spiraled deeper into despair. Mary felt a knot tighten in her stomach as she was forced to sit in her car, helplessly watching the ambulance pull away. She had wanted nothing more than to accompany her husband, Mason, to the hospital, but the paramedics wouldn't allow it. Instead, she sat there, anxiously gripping the steering wheel, praying fervently for his survival. Dear God, please let him pull through, she whispered, tears streaming down her cheeks. I love him dearly, and I promise I'll never be unfaithful again. Just then, her passenger door swung open, and Ellen, her daughter, hurried inside. Come on, let's go. The ambulance is leaving. Mary's hands trembled so violently that she could hardly grip the wheel. I can't drive like this. Let's switch seats, Ellen insisted, her urgency cutting through the fog of panic that clouded Mary's mind. By the time Mary climbed over to the passenger seat and buckled in, the ambulance's sirens were blaring, and its lights were flashing as it sped down the road. Ellen remained silent, a storm of anger brewing within her. Mary kept her eyes fixed ahead, her mind racing with worry. Did Jessie tell you what happened? Ellen finally broke the silence. Yes, Mary replied, her heart heavy. I found out that my mother and sister are women of easy virtue. Ellen's expression hardened. Mom, I'm your mother. Mary's gaze shot toward her daughter, a mix of frustration and disbelief. I have no idea who you are. If Dad doesn't make it, I'll never talk to you again. The car fell silent as they arrived at the hospital. They parked at the emergency entrance, and the sight that met them sent chills down their spines. The ambulance carrying Mason was already there, its doors flung open as medical staff hurriedly wheeled him inside. The sight of the oxygen mask on his face sparked a flicker of hope that he was still alive. Once inside, they learned that Mason had been taken to the emergency room and were asked for his medical information. Mary was on the verge of shock, so Ellen quickly took charge, grabbing her mother's purse to provide the necessary details while a nurse tended to Mary. As she fumbled with her phone, Ellen noticed 2 voicemails waiting for her, one from Jessie and the other from John. Sensing Jessie was likely calling for updates on her father's condition, Ellen decided to listen to John's message first. Hey Ellen, I've been trying to reach Dad and Jessie, but I haven't heard back from either of them. I'm starting to get worried. Please call me back so I can stop stressing out. Love you, sis. Ellen stepped outside, her heart racing as she dialed Joan back. The moment her sister picked up, she could tell Joan was anxious. Hey sis, thanks for getting back to me. Of course. What's going on? Before Joan could respond, Ellen cut in, are you sitting down? Yes. You're frightening me. What's the matter? Is it Dad? Yes. Mom and I are at the hospital. He fainted when he arrived home, and we don't have any further information except that he's still breathing. "I'm coming home tonight," Joan insisted. "Joan, there's nothing you can do tonight. Just come tomorrow morning." "But I need to be with my wife," Joan replied, desperation creeping into her voice. "How is she handling it?" "She's a wreck, just like the rest of us. She and May are at my house. Dad's asleep, so Jesse stayed with him. But Dad seemed fine, just tired, when he left here. Damn it, I shouldn't have let him go." "Please don't blame yourself," Ellen urged, her voice calming. "Just pray that he pulls through." "Wait, a man is talking to Mom. I'll call you back when I hear something. Love you, Ro." As Mary gradually emerged from her haze of disbelief, she realized that her careless words about what John would lose if he spoke had pushed him to his breaking point. The weight of her infidelity loomed over her, and she felt as though her world was crumbling before her eyes. Just then, a doctor appeared, and Mary rose to her feet. "Mrs. Lewis?" the stout man in green scrubs asked. "Yes, that's me," she replied, her voice trembling. "Well, we have your husband stabilized, but he remains unconscious. We haven't identified any physical causes, but we did notice in his medical history that he experienced a minor stroke last year." Mary composed herself as she recounted the previous stroke to the doctor. She noticed Ellen standing nearby, listening intently. Reaching out for her daughter's hand, she was met with a flinch as Ellen recoiled. Once the doctor departed, Mary turned to Ellen. "I suppose you blame me for this. Damn it, we need to unite instead of harboring anger over occasional indiscretions," Mary insisted. "That's precisely the issue, Mom," Ellen shot back, leaning in. "You downplay it, but Dad sees it differently. And now Jessie is terrified of losing her husband. Oh, and by the way, I just spoke with Joan." "Did you not inform him?" Ellen pressed. "He already feels guilty enough with the father figure he never had lying in the hospital. No, I won't tell him until Jessie and you decide to do so after we receive news about Dad." "Why would you withhold something that could potentially ruin his marriage?" Ellen retorted, her cheeks flushing with frustration. "Perhaps because I take after Dad and not you," Mary whispered, her voice trembling. The two women turned away from each other, retreating to opposite corners of the room. Ellen called Joan back, bringing him up to speed on the situation. He attempted to ask further questions, but she refrained from disclosing anything more at that moment, observing Mary on the phone, presumably speaking with Jesse. It felt as though the family was divided, with Mason's life and both marriages hanging in the balance. Meanwhile, Joan attempted to rest but longed to be in Edison with his family. After Mason's departure the day before, he had completed most of the training he needed, prompting him to decide to fly back to Newark. Being close to the airport, he opted for standby on the earliest available flight. He reached Newark by 7:30 a.m. and was home by 8:40 a.m. Not finding Jessie's Land Rover in the garage, he assumed she and Mason were still at Ellen's house. Despite the early hour, he brewed a cup of coffee and noticed 2 wine glasses in the sink along with 2 empty bottles of Pinot Noir on the counter. "It seems someone had a gathering without me," he remarked to the empty house. "I might need to look into this." Making his way to the den, he nearly became sick at the sight before him. There were white spots on the black leather sofa, and unused packages of protection lay scattered on the fireplace. "Oh God, no," he whispered, horror creeping over him. Somehow managing to ascend the stairs to the master bedroom, John began to cry upon seeing Jessie's wedding night negligee hanging from the lampshade in the disheveled bed. 2 large wet spots marred the center of the mattress, and an open tube of lubricant lay next to her wedding rings on the nightstand. His heart shattered as he discovered their wedding picture frame on the floor, its glass cracked between the 2 figures. He picked it up and, like a zombie, carried it downstairs to his favorite chair, feeling utterly lost. Meanwhile, Jessie found some solace chatting with Ellen's mom at her house. Though she managed to calm down a bit despite the dire situation, she knew her father wouldn't immediately inform Joan about her infidelity. Sleep eluded her that night, and when May jumped onto her bed, she woke up, desperately hoping that the chaos of the previous day had just been a nightmare. But the impending return of John loomed like a dark cloud over her mind. The sudden impact of her guilt hit her like a tidal wave, crashing over her with memories of her indiscretions with Alex spilling forth unbidden. As she scrambled to prepare the house for Joan's arrival, she urged her son, "Maze, come on, honey. Let's get dressed and tidy up before Daddy gets home." But the reality of her situation hung heavily in the air. As she dashed into the garage, she glanced at the clock and realized it was already late morning. "Wait," she giggled to herself, trying to maintain a light-hearted facade as she juggled bags of clothes and toys. She stepped into the kitchen and noticed a bottle of wine alongside some glasses on the counter. "I might have to appease him a little," she whispered, hoping that maybe Dad would change his mind about the whole situation if she played her cards right. Determined to hide any signs of her recent chaos, she quickly tidied up the kitchen, her heart racing as she stuffed the empty wine bottles into the trash. A small smile crept onto her face as she recalled the first time she and Alex had shared an intimate moment at this very table. It had been a complicated experience, excruciating yet oddly thrilling. While she waited for Joan to return that afternoon, she sat down at the kitchen table, admiring the room's newfound splendor. She had transformed the space, swapping out the old countertops for sleek granite, replacing the old sink with a deeper stainless steel model, and purchasing a new refrigerator, dishwasher, and stove. "Maybe John and I can tackle the security measures together," she sighed, trying to remain optimistic. That thought was quickly shattered when she heard Maze's frightened voice echoing through the house, "Mommy. Someone is sleeping in my bed." Her heart dropped as she leaped to her feet and rushed to the bedroom, finding Maze wide-eyed and pointing at the bed, the very bed where Alex had taken refuge during their secret rendezvous. She scooped him up in her arms, desperate to comfort him. "Do you remember the story of Goldilocks and the Three Bears? Goldilocks slept in their beds and ran away when the bears returned," she explained, forcing a smile. "Mommy will tidy up your room." After confronting the evidence of her own wrongdoing, she shut the door behind her and cautiously peeked into the master bedroom. What she saw brought her to her knees, her husband John, tears streaming down his face as he clutched a shattered wedding photograph. "Joan, you're back," he said, his voice trembling with pain. "I don't know what to say. I'm sorry you had to witness this. If Daddy hadn't come home early, I could have cleaned it up. But now you know. He doesn't mean anything to me," she blurted out, panic rising in her throat. "Be quiet. Who do you think you are? You slept with him, in our bed." "In Maze's bed," John yelled, his voice filled with disbelief. "Goldilocks?" Maze whimpered, confusion and fear evident in his wide eyes. "Seriously, Daddy? Mommy, I'm scared. Why are you shouting?" Maze cried, his small voice cutting through the tension. "Cursed be you," Joan spat, fury spilling over as she stormed downstairs. "Clean up this mess. I'll go calm down my son, if he even is my son. It only happened once, and I promised it wouldn't happen again," she lied, desperation seeping into her words. "We can work through this, for Maze's sake." As she rushed downstairs, she found Maze sitting beside the stains on the sofa, remnants of their chaotic lives. John wrapped his arms around their son tightly. "Are you satisfied now, Jessica?" he asked, his voice low and filled with disappointment. He only used her full name when he was truly upset. "What have I done?" she sobbed, noticing the discarded contraceptive wrappers and spilled liquid staining the dark leather cushions. Their careless actions had left tangible evidence of their infidelity, and in that moment, her vision blurred as she fainted, her world spinning into darkness. "What now?" John asked, his voice tinged with concern as he restrained Maze, leaning over to check on Joan. After a minute, she slowly regained consciousness, her head pounding. "John, I really messed up, didn't I?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He nodded silently, the weight of their fractured relationship hanging heavily between them. Meanwhile, Mary and Ellen had slept for hours, exhausted from the events of the previous night. They were jolted awake by the gentle voice of a doctor. "Hello, wake up," he said softly. "The good news is that his vitals are stable. He's being monitored via video, and will be alerted when he regains consciousness." "Will he wake up?" Mary inquired, anxiety knotting her stomach. "Only time and a higher power can answer that," the doctor replied, his tone serious. "Our specialists will conduct more tests in a few hours. I suggest you both go home, and we'll contact you when we have more information." Ellen, who had been by her mother's side, urged, "Come on, let's go home and get some rest." As they drove to her parents' house, the silence between them felt suffocating. "We need to call Jesse," Mary finally said, breaking the heavy silence. "And I need to ring Joan. He phoned me earlier, saying he'd catch an early flight. He was upset about Dad," Ellen added cautiously. "Please refrain from mentioning what Jesse did." During the 15-minute drive, Mary hesitated to make the call. "I promised I wouldn't," Ellen said, completely drained, both physically and emotionally. Mary grabbed Ellen's wrist. "I don't want to be alone tonight. Can I stay with you?" Ellen's anger softened as she replied, "Yes, of course. But know that I'm very upset about you cheating on Dad and encouraging Jesse to cheat on John." Just then, her phone vibrated, and she noticed it was Joan calling. "Ellen, how's Dad doing?" Joan asked, concern evident in his voice. "He's stable, with good vital signs. Still unconscious, but more tests are scheduled for today," she responded, keeping her tone steady. "Where are you?" "I'm at the IHOP on Route 1 with Maze. Jesse's at home cleaning up. I need to pick up my car from my parents' place. We'll be there soon. Bye, love you, bro," Joan said, his voice softening. "Love you too, sis," she replied, feeling a twinge of warmth. "Where is he?" Mary asked, curiosity getting the better of her. "He's nearby, having breakfast with Maze. He invited me to join, but Jesse's at her place tidying up. Do you want to head home or to Jess's?" "Jess's," Mary decided, recalling the promise she'd made not to tell him anything. At the IHOP, John was playfully teasing Maze, who was giggling and squirming in an attempt to escape his father's tickles. They waited for Ellen to join them before placing their order. "Are you both enjoying yourselves without me?" Ellen asked with a smile as she joined in on the fun, tickling Maze even more. Laughter erupted around them, lightening the mood, if only for a moment. Suddenly, she felt Joan's presence beneath her and quickly moved away, embarrassed as she caught her reflection in the window. "Oh gosh, I look awful." "No, you're pretty." Maze chimed in, his innocent grin brightening the atmosphere. Joan paused, pretending to contemplate her appearance. "Well, your hair looks like you've been sleeping in a hospital waiting room all night, and there's a fly open on your jeans." Alarmed, Ellen glanced down before realizing they were joking. "You little troublemakers," she exclaimed, laughing despite herself. "Gotcha, Aunt Ellen." Maze squealed, clearly enjoying the playful banter. "Okay, enough of that. I'm famished," John declared, but with Maze present, their conversation was kept light. Despite the weight of their shared troubles, they managed to exchange a few meaningful words. "I understand," Joan murmured softly, while Maze doodled on the paper placemat. Ellen couldn't help but notice the pain and anguish reflected in Joan's expression. "I'm sorry. I had no clue," Joan finally said, her voice filled with regret. "For how long?" John asked, his voice cracking. Ellen held up 6 fingers. "Weeks," she confirmed, shaking her head. "Months?" Joan asked, his heart breaking as Ellen nodded. The air was thick with sorrow, a reminder of the consequences of their choices. They sat in a fragile silence, each grappling with the reality of their lives and the decisions that had led them to this moment. Forgiveness felt utterly impossible at this moment, as John closed his eyes and slumped heavily against the bench cushion. "I've lost everything," he muttered, his voice thick with despair. Just then, Ma, his sister Ellen, grasped his arm and said firmly, "You still have me." Her words hung in the air, a lifeline in the storm of emotions. They embraced tightly, finding solace in each other just as Ellen's phone buzzed with urgency. "It's the hospital, Dad is awake. Thank goodness. Let's wrap this up and get there before Mom and Jesse," she exclaimed, her eyes lighting up with hope. They decided to order takeout, leaving Ellen's car parked at IHOP. As soon as they settled into the vehicle, Ma fell asleep in her car seat, granting them a much-needed moment to speak freely. "Should we notify them?" John asked, glancing in the rearview mirror at Ma. "No," Ellen replied, shaking her head. "We should see Dad first. We contributed to his condition by upsetting him, and we don't want to repeat that." John frowned, deep in thought. "But it was Jess who cheated, not Mom," he countered. "Yeah, but she fooled me too," Jesse admitted, his tone filled with remorse. "She encouraged Mom to cheat because you were away with Dad so often. How could I have been so oblivious?" Sighing, John replied, "Join the club. I've been looking after Ma while they've been playing their cheating games." "Did you know about Jesse's affair?" Ellen asked, her curiosity piqued. "Yeah, some time ago," John confessed. "She called me one evening, saying she was too drunk to drive. She was at a corporate retirement party, and I found her at the Hyatt Hotel, lying unconscious on a bench. Another guy from the party helped me get her into my car, but it was clear what had happened. He even pulled her underwear out of his pocket and said she had been flirting with him all night." "What's his name?" Ellen inquired, intrigued. "Alex Miller from Boston," John replied with a grimace. "He warned me that I should get out of there as soon as possible. He said her husband was vicious and would tear me to pieces if he found out." "Wait, how did he know my name and where I lived?" John demanded, incredulity etched on his face. "It's written on the name tag on your blazer, you idiot," Jessie exclaimed, shaking her head. "After that, I brought her back to my place, tossed her into the shower, and discovered she had slept with another man," John continued, anger simmering beneath the surface. "The next morning, I confronted her, and at first, she claimed not to remember anything. But eventually, she confessed, admitting that her mother convinced her we wouldn't find out. It seems they were right, until her father caught them kissing at the airport," Ellen remarked. "I should stop," Jessie interjected, her voice laced with uncertainty. "No, I need to know everything," Ellen insisted, her determination evident. "There's not much more to say," John replied, his tone heavy. "The next morning, she was mostly sick in the toilet. It must have suddenly hit her what happened because she started screaming, 'No, no.' She was overwhelmed with guilt and regret, confessing that they had been flirting through emails for months, and that night was the culmination of it. She swore never to do it again." "I can't believe it was her mother who told her it was okay to cheat," Ellen said, her frustration boiling over. "I still can't forgive her." After gathering Ma, they headed to the hospital, their hearts heavy with anxiety. Upon arrival, the physician informed them of their father's delicate condition and advised minimal interactions to avoid overstimulation. "His voice is barely audible, so you might need to lean in to hear him," the doctor cautioned. Ellen understood the gravity of the situation and knew she needed to inform the doctor about the events leading up to her father losing consciousness. A few minutes later, she returned, a relieved smile breaking across her face. "The doctor is restricting Jesse and Mom from seeing him until he's out of the woods." "Did he really say out of the woods?" John teased, a flicker of humor breaking through the tension. "Yeah, he did." Joan smiled for the first time since their arrival back in Jersey, playfully tapping John's arm. "But you get my point." "Hey, don't hit my daddy," Ma said, squeezing Joan's neck tighter. When Joan finally entered the hospital room, she was caught off guard by the sight of her adopted father connected to various tubes and wires. The steady beeping of the heart monitor emphasized the seriousness of the situation. "Hi, Pop Pop," Ma exclaimed, her voice loud and cheerful, causing Mason to stir and open his eyes. "Hey there," Mason managed, his smile strained, and his lip quivered. Looking past Ma, he caught sight of John. "Hello, Dad," John greeted, mustering a smile, though tears welled up in his eyes. "I wanted to tell you." "He knows, Dad." "We all do," Ellen interjected, entering the room behind John. "Let's focus on getting you better and out of here." "Out of the woods," Ma chimed in, echoing the doctor's words. "Right, Dad? You're listening to everything." But Mason looked directly at Ellen, his voice firm despite his weakness. "I don't want to see them." "I've arranged for security at the entrance," Ellen assured him. Mason weakly lifted his fingers toward John. "I'm sorry. Love you, son." "Love you too, Dad," John replied, his voice thick with emotion. Meanwhile, Jessie remained in a state of denial at her parents' house. Her mother urged her to tell John that the affair had happened only once. "Ellen is fully aware of everything, so there's no point in lying," she insisted. "John will never forgive me. I'll lose him, and he means everything to me," Jessie lamented, her voice breaking. "I warned you it was too risky. But you deceived Dad. Still, you'll have Ma, and that means John will have to interact with you," her mother replied. "I know he cares about you." In the waiting area, Ellen, Joan, and May huddled together, strategizing their next moves. Exhausted, they closed their eyes, with May nestled on her father's lap and Ellen resting her head against his shoulder. But Ellen stirred awake, startled by a noise, only to find May missing. "John, wake up. What's wrong?" she asked urgently. "May's gone. May. May." They both yelled, hurrying down the hallway toward the entrance. As they turned a corner, John spotted May in Jessie's embrace. "There you are," Joan exclaimed, shooting a glare at Jessie, who stood defensively beside her mother, Mary. "Why didn't you inform us when you were notified that Daddy was awake?" Jessie demanded, her voice trembling with emotion. "Yeah, Joan, why?" Mary echoed, arms crossed. Ellen stepped in front of John, saying, "You two put him in here. Your presence might do more harm than good. Besides, he said he doesn't want to see your deceitful selves." "They won't allow us past this point," Jessie cried, her eyes red from tears, her tone growing stern. "How was May allowed to run around without supervision?" "I heard Grandma shouting really loudly," May replied, looking up at her mother innocently. Just then, two female security guards approached from behind Mary. "Ladies, we've asked you to leave," one of them said firmly. Mary huffed and turned away. "I want to speak to the boss. I think May should come with us." Ellen reached for May, but Jessie hugged her tighter. "This includes John, May, and me. You're not part of us." Joan had had enough. "Alex Miller isn't part of us either. Ellen's right, you two are insane." "Come on, May," Joan urged. But May leaped from Jessie's arms into John's embrace. "I want to stay with him and Aunt Ellen. They're not crying all the time. John, please update me on Dad's condition. Is it a stroke? Can he speak?" Ellen pressed, her voice laced with concern as they stood on the precipice of uncertainty, their family torn apart yet desperately trying to find a way back to each other. Jessie's voice trembled with uncertainty as he asked for updates. "We need to conduct further tests and monitor him closely for a few days. Yes, he can speak, but it's challenging to hear and understand him. Please, refrain from visiting until he's ready." "When can we talk?" Jessie pressed. "Just give me a few days. I'll arrange somewhere to stay," Ellen replied with determination. 3 days later, Mason found himself sitting upright in his hospital bed, speaking clearly for the first time since the incident. The doctor had just left, explaining that it wasn't a stroke but rather a small tumor that might be operable. The room filled with tears as the weight of the news settled on everyone present. "Have you spoken to your mother?" Mason asked, breaking the emotional silence. Ellen rolled her eyes, extending her hand to John. No, she's still in denial, convinced that you two are reconciling. She's been staying at Jesse's place and doesn't realize I've discovered photos and love notes from all her boyfriends. That should be enough evidence to enforce the prenup my dad made her sign to protect our company and assets. How's Jesse holding up? Mason inquired, his concern evident. John glanced at Ellen, unable to respond. She tightened her grip on his hand, clearly feeling the weight of the situation. She keeps apologizing and pleading for Joan's forgiveness, Ellen said, her voice heavy with concern. Mason looked at John, who shook his head. She needs help. I'm not sure if the woman I married is still in there. I'll do what I can for Ma's sake, Mason replied, his voice tinged with resignation. Meanwhile, May played with the stuffed dog her father had bought for her from the hospital gift shop, but she listened intently to the grown-ups' conversation. Mommy needs help, she said softly. She told me she did something wrong and keeps hugging me. They said I should be discharged in a few days. I won't live in the same house as Mary or Jesse, Mason asserted firmly. Dad, Jessie didn't cheat on you, she cheated on me, John said, frustration evident in his tone. I believe if you talked to her, it could help her deal with things. She says she misses you and doesn't know who to turn to. I shouldn't have confronted her so harshly, Mason admitted. But I was thinking about you, Dad. How could she risk breaking apart what you two have? Joan interjected. Besides, she plans to be with him next month during our assignment in Toronto. Ellen chimed in, after that first instance, I should have noticed how often she went out with her friends while you two were away. Well, it happened, and now we're facing the reality of 2 divorces, Mason concluded, the heaviness of the situation hanging in the air. When you get out, you'll stay with John and me and May, Joan promised as they left Mason's room and headed toward the lobby. Suddenly, they heard Mary's loud voice echoing through the corridor. He's my husband, and I demand to see him, she shouted. The hospital security officer stepped in, trying to maintain order. Ma'am, the doctor has restricted both you and your daughter Jessica from seeing Mason Lewis. If you don't calm down, we will be forced to remove you. All right, I'll calm down, Mary said, though her frustration was palpable. Just then, before she could finish her sentence, she sprinted towards Joan and Mason, who was holding his dad's hand. In a swift move, the security officer tackled her just 10 feet away from the corner. As Mary was restrained, she looked up at Ellen, pleading, "Help me." "Let's go," Mason said, shielding his eyes from the scene, not wanting to witness his grandmother being restrained. "We'll wait for you outside." Once outside, Ellen leaned down and whispered to Mary, "You're going to have a sad and lonely life, and you'll only have yourself to blame." Mason's surgery went smoothly, and he made a full recovery. However, their plans to celebrate their 45th anniversary were dashed when Mary received her divorce papers on the same day. Initially, Mary threatened to contest the prenup, but she quickly backed down when Mason threatened to expose her infidelity to friends and family using incriminating photos and messages. Since Joan agreed to let Jesse keep the house, Mary moved in with her, causing both of them to become ostracized by the rest of the family and friends. Post-recovery, Mason mostly stayed at Ellen's house but made a point to visit his mother's place every other weekend. His knee healed well, and he began dating his charming physical therapist, who was 15 years his junior. Although they moved in together, they never tied the knot, with Mason playfully calling her grandma much to Mary's annoyance. As for Alex Miller, Mrs. Miller wasn't too pleased when Joan arrived with all the divorce court paperwork, detailing the dates and times of his escapades with Jessica. She was a formidable woman, once a blocker in the roller derby league. With a swift elbow to the nose and a forceful shove, she sent her soon-to-be ex-husband packing. "Do you think that got his attention?" she asked Joan, glancing back as Alex retreated. "Yes, ma'am, I think it did," he replied, trying to keep his composure. "Feel free to use those documents as you wish," Mrs. Miller said, flashing a smile that revealed 2 missing teeth from her roller derby days. "He won't have a penny left when I'm done with him." Meanwhile, Jessie persisted in her attempts to reconcile with John, but it became increasingly clear that her 6-month affair with Alex, spent mostly in bed, was too much for Joan to forgive. A year later, Jessie finally gave up when she dropped May off at Ellen's house and spotted the large engagement ring Ellen was wearing. "Well, if it had to be someone else, I'm glad it's you," Jessie cried, hastily leaving the house. Joan approached her brother and whispered, "It's the only way she'll let me go." Later, May mentioned that she had kicked their mother out of their house. Ellen made a playful remark, "I heard a rumor that Mom was caught in bed with Jessie's latest boyfriend. I guess there's no loyalty among promiscuous people. Now, take me to the bedroom," she whispered teasingly. The intertwining stories of betrayal, resilience, and the search for love in the wake of heartbreak painted a vivid picture of the complexities of family relationships. Each character navigated their own paths, confronting the aftermath of choices made and the consequences that followed, reminding us of the importance of honesty, loyalty, and forgiveness.